Good for us to be out on this cold night as we come together again, study God's Word. Before we begin, let's say a prayer before we start. Our Father, which art in heaven, we're thankful for all the blessings that you sent forth to us. Thy Son, Jesus Christ, who gives us this opportunity tonight to come together as an assembly of the Lord's church, to open your word and to study it, and pray that we'll always strive to seek and know the truth, that we always be able to be a light into the world, and that we'll always do things that are pleasing in thy sight. We're so thankful for this number here tonight as we study, and so thankful for all the blessings of life daily that you give us, our food, shelter, and clothing. Pray that we'll always realize that you send all these blessings to us. Pray that we'll always strive to help each other along life's journey, that we'll always be searching the scriptures daily to show ourselves approved in things we do, and we know that your word will guide us in all things of life. Pray that you'll be with us tonight as we study this word, that we'll be edified together and profitable for us, that we'll know more about your way, and that we'll be able to live a faithful life unto death, that heaven can be our home. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. 1 Peter 3, 1 through 7 is where our text is tonight. This 1 Peter's been a good study. There's been many first two chapters that we've looked at. It's just been filled with so many things that helps us as Christians along our journey. And tonight we will be beginning chapter 3. But as looking kind of back at what chapter 2 told us last week, as Peter continues to describe the life of a Christian, he mentions a lot of avenues of life is considered. We know back in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, he talks about we as living stones, or one is a part of a spiritual house. Then in verse 11 and 12, he talked about the social, the living righteously before all unbelievers as we go out into the world, that the way that we act is being seen by those unbelievers, and they watch the things that we do. The civil, he talked about in verses 13 through 17 about the rulers, government, the civil laws of the land that we obey. Talked about in verses 18 through 20 about the servants to obey your masters. About today we would say the employer and the employee relationship, to strive to obey the good as well as the harsh. Someone would like to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Who would like to read those?
Wives likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of the gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good, and are not afraid of any terror. Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered.
So we see here the first 6 verses is directed towards wives, and then the last verse towards husbands, as we look at tonight. We're going to look at a lot of good things that we can pull out from these first 6 verses that talks about the women. Our material also says, likewise, you wives, Peter begins a second application of the principles of subjection to authority and enduring unfair treatment just like Jesus. In this case, he instructs wives to be subject to their own husbands, even husbands who are unbelievers. A non-Christian husband may not treat his wife well or feel compelled to follow New Testament doctrine or Christ-like governance in the home. The wife may find herself treated as unkindly as the servant in 2 and verse 18, who have 4 masters. However, neither Peter nor any other Bible writer grants permission to suffering wives to put away worldly, unkind husbands and remarry others. Instead, wives are admonished to respond to unbelieving husbands with moral conduct, combined with respect for their authority as husbands. So as that the writer of the material there pretty well draws out the first 2 verses there, we see the word submissive in that reading. In verse 1, we can say that the reason was assigned is the possibility that unbelieving husbands will be won for Christ by the behavior of the wives. And I think you can pretty well see that in these cases, and we'll have some more on that in a few minutes. Talks about, husbands may not listen when the gospel is preached. They may not read the Bible. They might visit and hear some of the gospel preached, but are they listening there closely? But a wife, but a husband can observe the wife's chaste, pure conduct, it points out there in verse 2, and her reverence for God, and be gained by reading sermons without words. Sometimes we can read a sermon without words as we see the conduct of the wife there. It tells us in verse 2. Also, as we looked at there a while ago in 1 Peter 2 and 11, that we're to conduct ourselves righteously before all unbelievers out into the world, because we know, as we pointed out last week, the world is watching those that are ones that go to church, and the things that they do, the unbelievers will be watching. When me and Leanne married, I was not a Christian, had never attended church much, but Leanne started to a congregation, Mount Hope up in Tennessee. Her and her dad started going. I didn't go at first. Then the brother and nurse came to her house and had Bible studies, and I listened. And I sing sermons without words because of the way that a Christian acts. Finally, started going, listening, attending church, and later obeyed the gospel and stayed at that congregation for 21 years there and learned a lot. Brother Jim Sasser was a preacher there for several years, and a lot of times Jim would go visit family, so a lot of times I I would do some sermons for him and some things, so I learned a lot there. So you can, the wife can lead the husband to obey the gospel, as we see there in those first two verses. As Brother Dustin brought the lesson this past Sunday morning, a good lesson how that Brother Dickey's family and Katie, they led him to obey the gospel. We see the results of Dustin now as he is preaching and going to a lot of different places and preaching the gospel. So those first two verses bring out a lot there that one of the married couple may not be a believer, but they can be gained by the unbeliever. There may be others here tonight that have that same thing has happened to them, that they have been warned by the conduct of their wives, or others maybe by the husband that they've seen their conduct and have seen them being invited to church and to hear the word and then later obeying the gospel. Any comments on those first two verses that we see there?
Yeah,
Well, one thing we have the choice to marry a Christian or a non-Christian. And it's always safer to marry a Christian. She can help you, teach you, and obey you. And also, there's nothing said, I think, about do we keep a husband from helping a wife if she chooses to work, to help her in the home. I've been learning to put up with issues, you know.
Yeah, I'm doing that, taking divorces or retired.
Well, it'll be appreciated of housekeepers, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's right.
So Roger, the specific situation here is a wife teaching her husband through her conduct. But that's not dissimilar to how we can have influence on other people in our lives, right? That it may not be actually verbally the gospel. That may not be what gets them interested. It's just people see our conduct.
Yeah.
And that's the point in chapter 2, which you brought out. And now here's a specific example of it in this, of course, close relationship.
Yeah, Brad, I believe I seen that point made in one of Brother Hartwriter's books that sometimes we gain by reading sermons without words. We see that by the conduct.
But I'm going to make one other point back to the paragraph that you read out of the lesson material. And specifically where it says that Peter or any other Bible writer, they don't give permission to suffering wives to put away ungodly husbands. The reverse is true as well.
Yeah.
So husbands don't have the right. Peter or any other writer doesn't give husbands the right to put away their wives for anything other than, of course, what Jesus talked about a section around.
Okay. Thanks, Matt, for bringing that out. As we continue on, verses 3 and 4. Here Peter addresses the matter of orderly personal grooming for godly women. In verses 3 and 4, he uses a not but comparable form to show that the adornment of the inner person is more important than the enhancing one's physical appearance. Jesus uses this form in John 6:27 when he says, "Labor not for the meat which perish, but for the meat which endureth unto eternal life." The Lord is not teaching men that it is wrong to work for a living, but that working to feed the eternal soul takes precedence over feeding the earthly body. Likewise, Peter is not forbidding the use of jewelry, smart clothing, or well-arranged hair, but rather he wants godly women to focus others' attention not on their bodies, but on Christ, whose characteristics are reflected in their lives. greatest and most lasting impression Christians should have on others is that they belong to Christ, not that they are attracted, physically fit, stylish, or so the hidden, let your beauty be the hidden person of the heart. I think it's pointing out here. And the outward physical body and the inward adorning are contrasted here. That the adorning of the inner person is so much more special than the importance of enhancing one's physical appearance.
Roger, this is a sentence structure called relative negation, where part of the sentence is negated relatively to the other. Jesus said, lay not up treasures on the earth, but lay up treasures in heaven. So you got that not but relative negation thing. Is anything wrong with laying up treasures on earth? No, not at all. He's showing the importance of one over the other. And that's what he's doing here. And if you take that passage literally and use the King James Version, the New King James Version tries to smooth that out a little bit. Verse 3, do not let your adornment be merely outward. Well, King James Version says don't let your adornment be outward. Arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on apparel. Is it wrong to put clothes on? But, I mean, that's what you said, right? And the King James Version says, but let it be the hidden person of the heart. Again, you've got that relative negation where one is more important than the other. Not that the other is of no importance
Yes.
or of no value, but one part of this sentence structure is more important than the other.
You know, the thing about it is the women back here, the congregation, I can't tell you what they got on them back when they walk out the door. That because they haven't been flashy with anything particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much what you know. It's not that they're not dressed nice and that they are, but it's modest and you don't really pay that. That's not the thing you look at.
Yeah. Also says they're a meek and quiet spirit in those verses. It's pleasing not only to men, but also to God. I think in 1 Thessalonians 4:11, part of that verse says that aspire to live a quiet life. Also mentions precious to God. The inner person, I think God can see that inner person, and it's precious to Him. That's 1 Peter 1, verse 4, as we studied a few weeks back. We have that living hope that the inner person is what is pleasing to God. It's a pleasing also to Him. It's a quiet spirit, and we're precious in His sight.
You're right, the men have to be careful how they get certain things. They
Yes.
need to be a certain way too, but it can't come to men. Well, in the world, they got the preaching down around the knees, walking down the street. I mean, it's just much time in the world, but I mean, just out there, take the shirt off, well, I mean, that's just, I've always thought that's kind of emotional.
Oh, yeah, it applies to men too, how they dress. You can see a lot of immodest dress men.
Roger, connect verses 3 and 4 back to verses 1 and 2. So what is it about the wife's conduct that's going to perhaps convince her husband? It's not the outward stuff, it's the inner stuff. It's the
Yes.
inner beauty that will have that impact.
Yeah, I think all those 6 verses there, they're just, they teach so much about, from the different verses there, they apply to each other as they live a Christian life. As the Apostle Paul writes to Timothy, of course, this is familiar passages that we read, 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. If someone would read 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10.
And like right now also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair, golden pearls, or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works.
Okay? So we see that example here as Paul wrote to Timothy.
You have the same sentence structure, the same relative negation. It's not wrong to wear it over or whatever,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
but you find what is more important, the second part of the sentence.
Is it a concept of, says moderation, of over dressing with something? Is that what you, does that bring that out, Frank?
You can still braid your hair.
Yeah, you still bring it with you. You can wear a ponytail.
Still have
Yeah.
those. He's just making a comparison between one and the other. What's more?
Yes.
That doesn't mean that women can't go to the pizza shop on Saturday. Be ready for Sunday. The way everybody, or women used to be, when I was growing up, they had to go on Saturday. To be able to be ready for Sunday.
Yeah, the barber shops, they were always busy on Saturdays too.
That's true. That's true. I think about this inward, looking at the inward part instead of the outward part. Older men, that's easier for us to understand than the younger men.
Yeah.
Especially, one that, is single, one that may be, looking for a wife. That's probably one of the hardest things to do. But that is kind of,
Yes.
and by doing so, you've got such a much better chance of having a marriage that will be a fulfillment of the scriptures and be able to help you and help her get to heaven. I was not a Christian before. Well, we get married with me being an unbeliever. We're close, but through the conduct that she had, the conduct of her family, the conduct of the person that I work with, and then Don and Brenda, and then some of the older ladies at the River Bend. I didn't have a choice. Become a Christian. No.
Yeah.
You can't see how to obey the gospel in all of that around you, it would be pretty bad. It took about 6 months to convince me now. I didn't do it right off the bat,
Now, sometimes it takes us a while.
but Rhonda and I started at the college meeting. I saw her on the second pew when I went one Sunday, and I asked her out, and we started dating, and once I got more attuned with the scriptures and what a Christian really was, other than what the world calls Christian, that's what I thought I was at the time. Well, forgot my coin. I'll come back to it
Okay.
in a second. I forgot.
those,
Also involved in this is a desire to be what God be. Leanne, I'll mention something you mentioned to me probably 12 or 14 years ago. I preached a sermon on dress, on immodesty and so forth. And Leanne made a statement to me afterwards, I remember it so well. She said, I didn't really know how to dress. So what I did is look at these older women and the modesty that they displayed. And she said, I decided that's the way as a young Christian woman that I should dress also. And, well, that's powerful. And I think our kids today need to see it.
y'all looking at the,
Somebody, you imagine Brother Graydon down here, Brother Graydon's wife, and then just imagine her walking around here with a dress up the way up above her knees and all, and nobody ever, I mean, I never knew what she wore, but not that she didn't dress nice, but it was just nice.
I think the writer here of the material says, for a humble, godly heart will regulate modest enchantments on the outer person. As we look at the inward, godly heart, that will show on the outer person how they will dress. Verses 3 or 5 and 6. As we talked about the holy women, these verses will bring us into that. It says, for in this matter in former times the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. So to learn from the example of the holy women, as Peter is pointing out here, as Frank referred back to, looking women of the church, they should be set apart to a life of faithfulness to God and to their husbands. And as we just got through with the previous two verses, it was not because of their outward beauty or their earthly acclaim, any title that they may have held or anything like that, but it was because of their worthy lives and submissive attitudes. So the model for a Christian woman.
And it's interesting that Abraham is called the father of the faithful. I guess Sarah could be called the mother of the faithful. Abraham was the father of the faithful.
Yes, I believe that would be right.
And she didn't have any daughters, no daughters. So, yet, Peter makes this statement that godly women today are daughters of Sarah.
Yes.
And he uses her as an example of a godly woman, godly attitude, godly in her relationship to her husband, godly in the way she dressed. And that's how women today become daughters of Abraham, or daughters of Sarah, I should say.
Yes.
Expand on that part about where obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. So Rhonda can understand it.
Okay.
I'm trying to make it quiet.
She's got that in her Bible there, hasn't she? Yeah. Okay, as we look at these, as we looked at these verses and here and see what they say here in 1 Peter, I think our lesson would guide us back to Proverbs 31, virtuous woman. It says an examination of the worthy women of Proverbs will explain what Peter means by chastened conduct accompanied by fear. Let's look at Proverbs 31, the virtuous wife. and verse 10. Proverbs 31, beginning in verse 10, tells us who can find a virtuous woman. What does the word virtuous mean? It means having high morale standards, moral fiber, moral backbone to stand against that which is wrong, especially when challenged by others to do wrong. She always does what's right. She's righteous, good, respectable, commendable, godly. These verses will point out they contain information also profitable for men and women. These verses contain information that's profitable for men. We learn from verse 1 that King Leon wrote these words. However, he learned these important principles from his mother. Seems that Leon's mother wanted him to avoid the mistakes that were made by Solomon. We know Solomon, his life, for it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord, his God, as was the heart of his father David. A virtuous woman is the crown of her husband. We can read in Proverbs 12, verse 4, tells us an excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in his bones. Paul wrote to Titus that about older women, that they're to teach younger women. It says the older women likewise, that they be in behavior, not slanderous, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. That they admonish the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chastened, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. So a virtuous woman is very valuable, it tells us here. It says in describing the virtuous woman, rubies are mentioned. Rubies are precious stones that are known for their beauty. Their value makes them worth searching for. A person who finds one has something very special. The value of a virtuous woman is far above rubies. A virtuous woman possesses a special kind of beauty. She is a blessing to God, her family, and to others. There are many reasons why a virtuous woman is so valuable. She has value because she has a very special relationship with her family. She has a special relationship with her husband. She has the trust of her husband. As we read in Proverbs verse 11 there, 31, tells us the heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. I think in her handout it talked about he has confidence. He earns her confidence. She shows him appreciation for his labor. Proverbs 31:12 tells us she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She always treats him properly. She has goodwill towards her husband. Proverbs 31:23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She helps him to have a good reputation by her chastened conduct. she may have led him to the gospel as they grow spiritually together. Verse 21, she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She also has a special relationship with her children. She tends to them. She sees that they are well clothed. Verse 27, she watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She looks well to all their needs, whatever is needful for the family. Verses 13 and 14, she seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. Verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants. She is industrious. She works with her hand. Verse 16, she considers a field and buys it from her profits. She plants a vineyard. She plants and grows things to provide for her family. Verses 18 and 19, she perceives that her merchandise is good and her lamp does not go out in the night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. The quality of her workmanship is good, and she is not lazy. Verse 22, she makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She is able to take care of her own needs in the household. Verse 15, she also rises while it is night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She is diligent. Verse 17, she girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. Verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She is strong and honorable. Her faith is strong in God. Verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is the law of kindness. She speaks with courtesy and discretion, does not gossip about others, always has kind words. Verse 20, she extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is valuable because of her concern for the poor and needy. She does good to all. Because a virtuous woman is so valuable, she deserves to be praised. Verses 28 through 31, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is passing. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of her fruit of her hands. Let her own works prosper in the gates. The virtuous woman is confident in her abilities, but she does not praise herself. She will not be so vain that she would have to boast about herself. However, she deserves to be highly praised by her children, her husband, and her own works. So a very interesting question was asked in Proverbs 31:10. Who can find a virtuous woman? Look for the right kind of woman in the right kind of places. We know that Boaz found a virtuous woman. Ruth 3:11, for all the city of my people knows that you are a virtuous woman. Refer back to her conduct, her chastened conduct there. Because all the people of the city seen that. May God richly bless all virtuous women. Help us all to honor and respect our virtuous women. So I thought Those verses tied in with Proverbs 31 as we read about the virtuous woman. Then in verse 7, we get to the husbands. Kind of left. The writer of the material here says, likewise, you husbands, again, well, what a profound transition. What does Peter mean by the word likewise? It means the same thing that likewise means for the women in verse 1. Men are required to be in subjection to authority, and to patiently endure injustice in whatever role they find themselves in. In this context, husbands must be recognize their subjection to the will of God and treatment of their wives, and they must patiently endure whatever difficulties may arise in doing so. No man is permitted to be a dictator in his home, neither is he to view himself as the center of his family. God is the central being and final authority in the home of Christians, not the husband. Man is not permitted to make one decision or to give one order in the home that does not first meet with God's approval. Walk worthy, husbands, before your wives. Dwell with your wife with understanding. As we read, men are required to be in subjection to authority and to patiently endure injustice, whatever difficulties may arise. Ephesians 5:21 tells us that we're to submitting to one another in the fear of God. A husband must understand her special role and respect the physical and emotional difference of the wife. We're to honor the wife as the weaker vessel, it tells us there. As a physical vessel, it's not that they're weaker spiritually. We're heirs together, as it tells us, that we grow together spiritually as husbands and wives. And the husband's decisions always should include what is best for her. It talks about our prayers, that after marriage there is more responsibility and things that may come upon us, but the two shall become one flesh. That our prayers will not be hindered. Someone read 1 Peter 3:12. 1 Peter 3:12 talks about our prayers. First Peter 3:12.
For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are over their prayer. But the face of the Lord against those who do evil.
Okay,
I was just thinking about how many nights I knew I couldn't go to sleep. I offended you, and I must ask her forgiveness. I've got to humble myself to do it. But otherwise, Lord, don't hear my prayer, and I'm not
Yeah.
in danger, but I'm thinking of that.
yeah, so that's what verse 7 is telling us there, that the husband and wife their marriage should be so good that their prayers will not be hindered in anything. As also our handout tells us about that the man is a provider for the home, protector for the families, spiritual teacher, and guide in the home, and that be loving and tender towards their wives. As a few points that we didn't get to. Thank everyone for reading and being here tonight as we studied about this. Pray that this has helped us in our marriages, that we always treat one another so good that things will always be good with us and that we all grow spiritually together. Thank you.
Roger, need to point out that the material for next week is back here too.
Yeah, we finished up lesson 5 and we'll begin on lesson 6 next Wednesday night. And that material is on the table on the left as you go out.
Number 22, he is in our midst. Draw from the springs of salvation.
Last night is one of my favorite nights of the year. And the reason it is one of my favorite nights of the year is not because I get to steal the candy that my children bring back from trick-or-treating, but I like to be the guy that sits at the front porch and hands out the candy. I like to be that guy because I just enjoy seeing those little smiling faces as they come up and run up to you and say, trick or treat, and you're able to hand them a piece of candy and they're able to look at you with glee and say thank you and then run away. Now, some of them did not respond with thankfulness in their heart. I told John McCants, who was on the front porch with me last night, I said, we're going to have somebody tonight that's going to complain and grumble about the size of candy that we give them. And sure enough, we had one. She looked at the candy that I put into her basket and she said, is that all?
And I said, ooh, you know how that is. But still yet, one of the things that John and I were doing is every time they would come up, we were trying to guess what the individual was dressed as. And oftentimes we would have, because kids would have on jackets last night because it was so cold, that we'd have to ask them, what are you supposed to be? And of course, we saw our Iron Men and Spider-Men. We saw princesses. We saw unicorns. We saw dinosaurs. We saw one little boy who said he was Michael Jackson's stormtrooper Willy Wonka. And it was all at the same time. It was very fashionable. Very fashionable. But I woke up this morning and I was actually talking to my wife, Melissa. I don't know if y'all know who she is. But I was talking to her and we were talking about this and some of the pictures that we've seen on the interweb from other people and other places. And who is it that we would want our children to dress up to be like? Too often, if we're not careful as parents, we impress upon our children that we want them to be like the latest and the greatest basketball, football, baseball. We want them to be the latest and greatest influencer or a musician, any other fictional character that may be seen, either character in cartoon or characters in fictionalized movies. But who would I want my children to imitate in their daily lives? And the first thing that came to our mind was Jesus. We want our 3 sons, we want our boys to imitate Jesus. 1 John 2 and verse 6, the one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. There is no greater objective that could be given to each of my sons than for them to know Jesus is their supreme example. He is the one. Beyond all others that you will ever have here on this earth, even myself nor your mom, we will fail you. We will fall short. But Jesus won't. Imitate him. Or imitate the Apostle Paul, as Paul would say to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1, imitate me as I also am of Christ. So if you imitate the Apostle Paul in a roundabout, you're imitating Christ. Imitate the Apostle Paul, not the Apostle Paul who was the persecutor of Christians, but imitate the Apostle Paul who was not ashamed of the gospel even to the point of death. In 2 Timothy 1 and verse 12, he says, "For this is the reason I suffer these things, and I am not ashamed. For I know in whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard that which I have entrusted into him this day." Imitate that. But yet, when we think about Jesus and we think about Paul, those are men, those are characters, those are individuals that we imitate out of here. But what about individuals that my children can see on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis when they attend their local services? They need to imitate our elders. Those 4 men who serve as our shepherds. I hold each of those men up high because I consider these men to be resilient. I consider these men to be courageous. I consider them to be strong. And most importantly, I consider these 4 men to be faithful. And as such, in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 7, the Hebrew writer said, "Remember those who lead you, who spoke the word of God to you, and considering the result of their conduct, imitate their faith." How many of us are talking to our children about imitating our elders? Not in a mocking manner, but in a serious manner. That these men have your soul entrusted into them as your shepherd, and they love you and they want you to go to heaven. But then what about each and every one of us? How many brothers I have sitting right now in front of me that I want my sons to grow up and be like? I want my sons to imitate your kindness. I want my sons to imitate your faithfulness. I want my sons to imitate your knowledge, your wisdom, your humbleness. You see, brethren, it's up to each one of us not only to follow the greatest example, but also to be an example. Because there's always someone watching us. I know that this is not a gospel invitation, but yet Jesus is the reason that we are here this evening, and it is the reason that I put this together. And if you are not found imitating him, what better opportunity is given? A song has been selected to encourage you, and if there's any need, come now as we stand and as we sing.
While we pray, while we plead, while you see souls in need, while your Father calls you home, will you not descend and come? Why not Come to Christ.